G'day Bomber fans, the VFL team has had a very tough fortnight, but we have seen some huge developments that directly affect the AFL side in the reserves. We've had some unfortunate injuries to young stars, some others return from their own injuries. We have seen the club debut a player from our recent mid-season draft, so let's talk about the last couple of weeks in the reserves and highlight the performances from our AFL listed players. Quick recap of the two matches we have played. There was a curtain raiser against the Tigers at the G before Dreamtime. It was tight early, we trailed by 3 points at halftime, but the Tigers would pile on the goals late and eventually won by 61 points. A bit of a belting, unfortunately. And the following week, we had some huge omissions. We took away a few to travel over to the Gold Coast, so we had our backs against the wall against Box Hill. They had their way with us. They kicked the first 10 goals of the match. We were actually goalless at halftime, so we would eventually end the game 72 points behind, meaning it was back-to-back beltings for the boys. Our next game is against Carlton next Sunday at Windy Hill before the King's Birthday Eve match. But let's get on to the AFL listed players and their performances. Shiel missed the Richmond game due to illness. I wonder if he picked up that virus that was going around the club, but he did return to play against Box Hill the week later and was pretty good. The thing is, he's consistently amongst our best 5 or 6 best on ground each game, which you would expect from an AFL listed player, but he isn't really having those matches that demand you a spot in the team. I'll talk about Setterfield in a second, who has come back and demanded that spot in the AFL side, but Shiel hasn't been doing that. It's pretty worrying when a senior player who is earning so much money can't excel in the reserves. I need to see a monster game, 30 touches and a goal vibes. That's what a former All-Australian should be doing when demoted to the reserves. I look at guys like Jack McRae and Caleb Daniel at the Bulldogs. When they were demoted, they responded with video game number stats, and Shiel just isn't really doing that. He's playing his role in the midfield. He's being very effective, but he's not dominating like a player with his history should be doing, so it's not good to see. Sam Weideman, now his stats don't look great, nothing too noteworthy, but if you actually watch the games, you would know that he's slotting into that defence really nicely. I actually thought he was one of our better players in the Box Hill game, and he only had less than 15 disposals. He was just rock solid though. He was reading the play really well. I think without him, we would have suffered a lot more, so credit to Weideman, who is still showing us that he could be a handy depth option in the back line if there are injuries. I think he's probably due an emergency spot for this weekend's game, given the Blues and their lack of key forwards. I do think he was less influential against the Tigers, but that was a brutal game. Well, both were brutal games, actually. I think how tough it was in this D50 in the last fortnight, Weideman held up well, so good on him. Will Setterfield returned from his injury in the VFL, and it was quite clear to see that he was just not supposed to be playing at this level. This is what we've been wanting to see from Shiel, that statement game. Setterfield was immense. He was by far our best on ground. He had 29 touches, 2 goals, another sighter as well. He had 6 clearances, 7 tackles. He was just everywhere. He was rested a bit as well, so probably could have had more of the ball if he wasn't just returning from his injury. He should probably come straight back into the AFL side. He played far too well and looked far too good to be given another week in the reserves. I feel like no player has had it tougher in the last fortnight than Lewis Hayes. I remember earlier in the year highlighting how well he was working because of those around him and his ability to be more free, but he has been very defensively orientated lately, and that's because we've been under the pump as a team. We're conceding goal after goal, inside 50 after inside 50. Hayes has had it tough. He has had some goals kicked on him, but I feel like he's been okay. He hasn't been as dominant in the air as he was early in the year, but I can't really blame him for that. I think we just need to see him against some teams that aren't completely belting us off the park. Hopefully our upcoming games are kinder to young Hayes. Nick Bryan played the one game in this period. He flew over to the Gold Coast and played with the AFL side for the first time this year, and it's mainly due to how good he's been going in the reserves. He continued his dominant form against Richmond. He's been incredible the last few weeks, although in saying that, this was probably the least impressive of the 3 or 4 games he's torn apart in the last month or so. He had 46 hitouts, 23 disposals, but most were unopposed, and despite the numbers, our midfield was also beaten quite easily. I don't think it's Bryan's fault for that, but it should be mentioned that his dominance didn't really manage to translate to the team's success. He was definitely one of our better players, as he has been for most of the year though. Reid, I'm sure we're all well aware of the really disappointing news regarding Reid. He has been sidelined for, I think, probably the whole season with yet another injury. The guy can't take a break. He went for a tackle and ended up injuring his pectoral muscle. Before that, he was performing really well. He was probably due an AFL match against a taller Carlton forward line. He's been rock solid since coming back from his round 1 injury, so it's really disappointing for him to be back stuck on the sidelines, not being able to play footy. Luamon Lual has had a very quiet few weeks. Even in the last video, I was saying he was a bit down on form since moving up onto that wing, so I think we've found that his best position for current output is in defence. To be fair, he did play defence quite a lot in this little period, so it wasn't all spent on the wing. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, he was following young Nick Watson around pretty closely. His defensive work is usually pretty good, but Watson had the better of him on a few occasions. And the reason he was drafted was because of his attacking capabilities, which we have unfortunately been starved of a bit in the last 3 or 4 rounds. So we probably need to see him a bit more from Luamon while in the VFL with ball in hand in these coming weeks. Jayden Davey has had his worst fortnight in Essendon colours. He has been very quiet, 16 disposals in 2 weeks, no goals, a couple of siders, but hasn't really managed to do anything properly. His pressure is wavered, so too his impact with ball in hand. He's really struggled to get into games like he was doing at the start of the year. I would say he was our quietest player on the whole field against Box Hill, including the VFL listed players, so that is never what you want. You never want to be performing that badly. Hopefully he turns things around, because it was only a few weeks ago where he had that mini breakout game. We need to see more of that, because right now he is definitely struggling for form. It's a bit worrying. Archie Roberts played the one game against Richmond before flying over to be an emergency for the Gold Coast game. Roberts was alright against the Tigers. His lofty standards make judging him hard, because even when he plays well, you're still pointing towards his better games and looking for improvement. 18 touches, mostly handballs. He had his work cut out for him because the Tigers were destroying us a bit in that second half. He was working hard, but often for naught. I wouldn't say it was a down day. I just don't think he really had enough of an opportunity to properly impact the game as he would have liked. He was often on the back foot. He won't lose confidence from this game. I still think he was okay. It was a really interesting fortnight for Vigo Visentini. He's been used a lot more in the ruck in recent weeks. He was still the backup for our game against Richmond, but managed to get 21 hitouts because the Tigers don't really have a ruckman. But he was a big presence up forward as well, which was good when the ball was down there at least. The big game was the Box Hill match, because he was our main ruck due to Bryan's absence, and it meant he was going to be up against AFL-listed ruck Max Ramsden. In fact, Ramsden has played AFL footy already this year, so this was a really enticing matchup for me. I was quite keen for it, and Visentini was taught a little bit of a lesson. His stats look alright, 25 hitouts, 12 disposals, a couple of clearances, but Ramsden was one of the best on ground. He had 27 hitouts, 23 touches, 2 goals, 6 clearances. He was just a lot better than Visentini, quite a lot better, but it's a good learning curve for our young ruck, and he finally got to play in his natural position for the whole match, which we haven't seen from him yet. Tex Wanganeen has had a much improved fortnight. In my last video, I was quite worried about him because he hasn't really done anything this year, but his last 2 matches have been really solid. Not fantastic, but it's a step up from where he has been when I was talking about him last. He's hit the scoreboard, which is good. He's kicked a goal in both games. He's had some sighters as well that could have improved his stats, but it was that Box Hill game I was most impressed with. He was probably the most dangerous player forward of the ground. He was making things happen with ball in hand. Sometimes you don't know what he's going to do when he gets it. He's often unpredictable, but very creative. And I said a few videos back, if Wanganeen is getting 15 to 20 touches, we are a better team because of it. The issue is this is the only time this year where he's got over 15 touches. So we need some more consistency now. He needs to realise how impactful he can be and start building from this. He played a good game against Box Hill. We need to see those good games continue and throw in some really A-grade matches in there as well. Now, I think most here watching will be waiting eagerly to hear about our new recruit, Saad El-Hawli. I saw a tweet a few minutes into the game of someone complaining about the pickup because he only had 1 or 2 touches during the first term, which aged about as well as milk, because Saad was definitely one of our better players. He spent most of his time on halfback or a wing. I feel like he was pushed up pretty high at times, so I'm going to say it was kind of a wing halfback 50-50 split. I could be wrong though. I was very impressed. He was really energetic and really hard at the contest, so it was probably the only silver lining out of that Box Hill game, to be honest. The fact that our new recruit would have been in the votes for best and fairest. He made an instant impact. I was most impressed with his aerial work. I've seen some highlights of him and those big grabs, but I didn't expect him to be competing in the air as much as he did. It's good to have a young man who is really driven and competitive that can do that. I think that's the right word as well, competitive. He competed more than anyone, so it's going to be really exciting to see what he can do with these next few weeks and how close he can get to featuring for our AFL team. The pickup is looking like a good one after the first week. 25 touches on debut. You can't ask for too much more than that. And finally, Jye Menzie. He played just the 1 VFL game in this period before he replaced Davey Jr. in the AFL. He was previously playing as a wingman in the reserves, but he spent a lot more time in the forward half against Richmond, which did mean he was often starved of opportunity, but he still managed to pop up for 2 goals and have a real impact around the ground when the ball was around him. I feel like his stats look a lot worse than the impact he had, so I wasn't mad to see him in the AFL, but you could tell when he got to the AFL that he would be pushed up on a wing, because that's where he's been for, I reckon, 70 or 80% of the time in the reserves in the last 2 or 3 weeks since his return from his injury. But that is that. Let me know what you think down below. Anyone in the reserves you are particularly happy with right now, let me know. That is all. Like, subscribe, and as always, go Bombers.